Good afternoon, everyone. I see it's 1 minute past. Some people will probably still be joining a bit later. My name is Julius Wijnands, and I'm from the Catalyst 2030 team. I'm very excited to welcome everybody to this virtual round table discussion on client-driven evaluation. I am helping with the logistics of the session, and so before we begin, I just want to say some quick stuff on this. First of all, we are recording this session. This session will be posted on the Catalyst 2030 website for everybody to look back and for us to learn more about it. Please feel free to use the chat function at the bottom of your screen. This allows you to ask questions to the speakers during the entire session. After the session, we will also send out a form because we're very curious about your feedback, what you thought of the session, and for further improvements. And the last quick thing, it will probably not happen, but as you probably are well aware, there have been some Zoom bombings going on, and we're trying to do everything to avoid this, but if this does happen, please just stay calm and we'll take care of it. And now I'd like to give Frederick Galtung, the moderator of this session, the word to continue. So thank you.
Julius, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Well, welcome all of you. So wonderful that you're able to join. And some of you got this invitation at very late notice. So really delighted that you are able to take part. And I know that many others were also interested in our agenda. And I see that there's still some people joining. So I'm Frederick Galtung. I'm from True Footprint in London, and I'm going to be moderating this session. I'm a member of Catalyst 2030, which is a practitioner-led movement of social innovators, intermediaries, funders, and partners working to achieve the SDGs by 2030. And if you're interested in joining, you can contact Julius, among others, to let us know about this if you're not already a member. And so in these catalyzing change sessions, what we're looking to do is, one is to share social innovations that are responses to the COVID-19 crisis, and that's on health, but many other dimensions as well. And to form collaborative partnerships that can accelerate social change, to co-create policy recommendations based on the extensive expertise of social innovators, initiate dialogues across sectors with funders and leaders to really create the kind of systems change that we need to achieve results far more efficiently, far faster than we have been doing until now. This specific roundtable discussion is around the issue of client-driven evaluation. That I know is dear to many people who are in this call. And so these are really quite unprecedented times for all of us. We think that client-driven evaluation can indeed play an important role in this transformation and in the systems change. But before we delve into that, would you mind just checking in briefly, all of you, and a couple of you have already used the chat function, or at least one of you has. Would you just share with us quickly how you're feeling today? What's going on with you? If you don't mind sharing that in the chat, just tell us what's going on with you. Just a word or two. So we just get connected a little bit, because doing a round of introductions will take us a bit too long, but it'll just be nice to see. Well, how amazing. Really incredible to see people checking in from so many different places. That in itself is really a gift, to get perspectives from so many geographies. I'm going to introduce our amazing panel. And I'll start off with Katharina Hammler, Kathi, from Fundación Paraguaya. And you've been with Fundación Paraguaya for a number of years. So you've really been key to the journey that the Fundación has been on for these last several years. You work on multi-dimensions of multi-dimensional poverty measurements. And one of the key tools that the foundation has developed is the poverty stoplight, a methodology that enables families to assess their level of poverty and to carry out personalized strategies to overcome their deprivations. You have a PhD in international development from Tulane. Fantastic to have you on board. And Tab Barker is the founder of Project Schoolhouse and is in Austin, but is normally to be found in central Nicaragua. And he's here with his colleague who has taken over from him, Selina Serna, who is the executive director there. And he's going to tell us about the work that he does, which is truly bottom-up work focused in a specific region of Nicaragua and how they work with local communities there. And then we have the indomitable Michael Green, Chief Executive of the Social Progress Index. He's an economist, we won't hold that against him, who has written a couple of important books. He's a star of the TED circuit, whose speeches have been viewed several million times. But what he's really known for then is the Social Progress Index that SPI puts out. And he'll tell us a bit more about that and how this can help our agenda. So what I'd like to just introduce a few and say just a few words about this concept of client-driven evaluation and just suggest a little frame for that I circulated to some of you, but maybe not everyone saw it. And starting with just a basic heuristic, a feedback triangle. You can initiate feedback either as the funder, A, as B, or the government, B as the implementer, for example, the NGO, a social enterprise, or C as the client, the community, the citizen, or even the consumer. And the question isn't who is asked, the question is who controls the on and especially the off switch of that feedback mechanism. Is it A, B, or C? And what we suggest is that a client-driven evaluation solution, at the minimum, right, the clients have to be able to switch it on, and it can't be switched off, right? So they have to be able to initiate that process. There has to be something there that they can initiate. They have to have some freedom to identify issues that are important to them. It can't all be set in advance. And third, in the ideal case, the proposition is that at least some of the time, there has to be a closed loop. Something has to feed back to them. It has to be possible for them to do something that leads to something happening. We have type C solutions, client-driven solutions, that are the basis for some of the best-known internet companies, right? Airbnb, eBay, Booking.com, many of these things are facilitated by the fact that customers are able to initiate reviews. People are able to see each other's reviews. But the proposition is that in the social space, this doesn't exist all that often, right? Where clients are able to initiate their evaluation and they are able to determine what is evaluated in line with what's important to them. And that some of the time, even the loop gets closed on this. Imagine if you bought something on eBay, booked an accommodation or ordered an Uber driver, and it never showed up, or you never knew how often it would show up. That would be the lack of a closing of the loop. Now, the proposition is that there's a reason why this isn't so common. And there are two propositions for this. One is a design issue. Is that actually clients, beneficiaries, one could call them, communities where we work, they may be at the center of our work, but they are not consumers. They don't have the power of a consumer. The consumer can just move from one provider to another. The clients can very often not. Right? Often they're vulnerable. They may be weak. They may be less educated. They may be poor, and they don't have that freedom. And the second is a design issue. Is that actually clients are not consumers. It's not the same thing. So simply giving feedback doesn't move the needle on its own. So those are a couple of propositions and a possible working definition. So to kick off this conversation, I wanted to ask, why do we think client-driven evaluation might matter, right? Do you see that being in some ways part of your work? And if I could kick off with Tab here, you have developed a truly bottom-up process that is at the heart of the way that you work, right? What does client-driven evaluation mean for you? Turn up, yeah, you're on mute. Still on mute.
There we go. Yeah, well, thank you, Frederick, for that. I will say, while client-driven evaluation as a term is new to us, it's been a part of our operation for a long time. I think that as we have moved forward through the years, we work really hard to only make mistakes once, only make new mistakes, you could say, and that we believe that the developmental experts that we really need to be paying attention to are the people that live in the communities where we work. As we have evolved over the last 16 years in Nicaragua, we have continued to develop an ideology and a way of implementing projects that has put the clients, as you call it, or the communities that we work in at the center of our programs. As we have had programs and gone to fix and improve the way that we work, the way that we formulate the rules of engagement between ourselves and the communities, we've moved closer and closer to a model that has client-driven evaluation, as you'd call it, in the middle of it. When I first showed up to Nicaragua in 2005, I did, I made, I think, this mistakes that every well-intentioned person looking to do development projects makes. I partnered with the Department of Education, and we went out and we found some communities. My idea was to build schools. We found some communities that wanted to build schools. They said yes, and we built some schools, and those projects, while we achieved our objective, they were hard projects, and the org quickly began to pivot towards listening to those communities, and our model changed rapidly to involve water, to involve latrines, sanitation. And as we've moved forward, we have built around that. Today, our entire pipeline is made up of communities that literally knock on our door. And that's become how we build our pipeline now, is through word of mouth communication and listening to the people that really show up to talk to us. Now, it may not be the most formalized or technologically advanced way of doing client-driven evaluation, but I believe it is extremely effective because it's coming directly from the individuals and the communities in the places where we work. And we have a lot of intimate communications, one-on-one, person-to-person communications with these communities where we work. And so we're getting really the best possible information in terms of what are the needs of these communities, letting them prioritize that, and then we implement towards that. And I believe strongly that one of the secrets to our success is not trying to use too much technology. We base all of our even the way that we do our projects is based on the lowest forms of technology available, because we're working in places without electricity. They're off the road. Often we're hauling materials on horses. And so the same thing is in the way that we put the communities in the middle of it, is that we really are, I mean, we're talking on cell phones, we're talking directly to people and in person. And so the whole way that we work is based on putting the communities in the middle of the process and trusting them to know what the problems are that they need to solve, what the order of those, what the priorities are. And because they have to donate all the labor, and our whole model is based around the donation of labor from the communities that we work with, then we have to trust them to know which problems they're ready to solve and that they are ready to do it. I could go on, but I think that kind of.
And just give 2 examples of the kinds of projects that you're doing.
Okay, well, I mean, this year we're turning on clean running water to 1,500 to 2,000 people. We have 4 projects happening this year, and they all came to us in that same way. So they're communities of 30 to 60 families that formed a water board, showed up at our office, pitched their project to us. They already knew how we worked, and we put them in our pipeline and went through all the processes. And so it takes a couple of years to get to the point where we start building sometimes, but we broke ground, we're laying pipe, we're building tanks, capturing springs, and at the end of the day, you have a community of 30 to 60 families who spend possibly an entire calendar year trenching in 10 miles of pipe into the ground to build a distribution system inside their own community for clean water, potentially a new elementary school, always latrines when we do water. And we are achieving in these projects often 100% participation from the families in these communities. And I think that if you want a metric that really lets you evaluate whether you're in tune with the priorities and the needs of the communities you're working with, is if you can get up to 100% volunteer participation from the members of those communities, it means you're on target and in tune with what they need and how you're handling those projects.
Andrea here in our group is asking, what is the role of government in these initiatives?
We work with the government. We tend to not work with the federal government that much, but we work closely with the local government, and they have actually become one of our bigger partners in that they contribute to the projects that we work on. Sometimes they will suggest projects, and then we'll go in and check in with those communities to see if that's what they really want and kind of enter into that dialogue. But we work closely with the local government. It's really important that we do that. They're an important partner for us.
Thanks. Thanks a lot. And by the way, you said that the term was new to you. It's new to me as well, by the way. So the term client-driven evaluation is not one that I came up with. It's come up synergistically out of this collaboration here. And actually one of the things we could question and ask is it a good term? Over to you, Kathi. Yeah, again, just using this term for now, but happy again to get feedback on it, is tell us how does it resonate with you?
Oh yeah, thank you, and hello everyone. So I'm here representing the Poverty Stoplight program, and for us the term is definitely new too, but I actually find it to be very helpful. So what we do, our core idea is that we want to work towards eliminating poverty in all its forms. Like we have a very multidimensional concept of that. And we don't think that it can be done basically from the outside. So we don't think that poverty can be eliminated if, let's say, a well-intended, be it a government, be it an organization, comes in and solves poverty for whoever is affected by it. But it's very much about giving voice and agency to people, and to make sure that people have a chance to kind of take ownership of their own life. That of course implies also creating a structure that enables them to do that. But in its core, it is about this concept of agency. And in that sense, I think it doesn't make sense to talk about any other form of evaluation than one that is really driven by people whose well-being we're talking about. So if we are truly interested in improving people's well-being and in making sure that everybody gets to kind of live the life that they want to live, the only thing that matters is for people to be able to say, yes, this worked for me, or no, this didn't work for me. So in that sense, I think it needs to be like, the question is, why aren't we there yet? So like, that's really for me the bigger question here. So just maybe a couple of words about the Poverty Stoplight to give some context. The Poverty Stoplight itself is both a metric and a methodology. So it's a metric in the sense that it is a relatively simple measurement tool based on the stoplight colors, red, yellow, and green, that we use to work with people so that they can kind of self-evaluate where they are in specific indicators of well-being that are also defined with the community. And then the results of that survey are used to work with people on defining priorities, like which of the areas do people want to work on, which of areas do they want to improve on. And then kind of to work again together, like in the community with families, with mentors, that depends a little bit on the context, on specific solutions to solve that problem. So for me, the concept of client-driven evaluation is really built into this process of like kind of a continuous feedback loop of, is what we're working on important to me? Does it work for me? Did it improve something for me, or for my family, for that matter? I'm new to the term, but I'm already a big fan, because I think it's really where we need to be if we are serious about improving well-being. Maybe one example that one little story that we like to tell. About an example of what it means to listen to priorities of people. So we have this, among the many projects that we have, is this one project in a community that is a little bit outside of Asunción in Paraguay. It's in Cerrito. It's a community of about 1,000 families. And we're working there with the Poverty Stoplight with the entire community. And when we first started working with this community, and kind of started by assessing needs, by kind of looking what the things are that people are lacking. Like some of the results were very straightforward. Things like people lack income, people lack insurance, people lack access to health, and so on. But then the second step was to ask people which areas of, like, which deprivations, which areas of poverty they want to kind of work on first, and as a community move on first. And what came up on top there was garbage removal, which to us was really mind-blowing, because it's not what you normally would assume a community that is deprived in so many ways to be wanting to work on. So that's been very helpful, just to kind of shift the way that the project was rolled out towards really trying to meet the needs and priorities of the specific community.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Mr. Green, Michael, yeah, you have a different methodology, but how does this concept of client-driven evaluation resonate with you?
I'm being very formal today, Mr. Galton. Well, you set the tone. Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Nice to be here. Maybe I would frame my remarks in two confessions. The first confession is, I may have not been clear in the introduction, is that I'm actually a recovering bureaucrat. I worked for many years in the British government. And that matters not just because my therapist says I have to mention it at all times, but also because it taught me to be an optimist. And I'll tell you why. Working government taught me an optimist because, one, it made me realize the enormously stupid things we could do. And that means that if only we could stop doing stupid things, the world could be so much better. So these things, we're not trying to split the atom or discover cold fusion. Stopping doing stupid things, stopping wasting money, would make huge progress possible. And I think that actually is good news, because that's actually quite achievable. The second thing it taught me was that actually the vast majority of the people I work with were smart, committed, well-intentioned. The problem was they were just struggling to actually deliver on what they wanted to do. When people talk about government solving a problem, it's often people seem to think the government is somehow omniscient. I mean, asking the government to solve a problem, practically, is like trying to button your shirt wearing boxing gloves with a blindfold on. So often what government is trying to do to respond to a problem is based on massively incomplete information, either internally or in the public debate, that means you're struggling to find some kind of solution. And the result of that is we often end up doing things that don't achieve the ends that we want. But it's the only thing we can think of doing, or the thing that answers the public debate. And that, I think, really matters to this, which is, I think, if we can change the conversation to the real things that matter to real people and communicate that and make that the basis of our conversation, it will be absolutely transformational in how we use resources. And that's why I think this conversation is so critical. And I'm so glad we've already so quickly got to a key action point, which is we've got to ditch client-driven evaluation as a term, because it's not compelling enough. I think we should be talking about real evaluation. If I've got a fancy cost-benefit analysis, I'm an econometrician, an economist, as Frederick said, that tells us a project worked, but it hasn't improved people's lived experience. It hasn't worked. There is nothing real apart from the lived experience of people. This is real evaluation. How can you make decisions about anything unless you're talking about reality? So that's my humble suggestion, is that we should got to think about nomenclature, or maybe real evaluation isn't the right word, but we make clear that this is what this really matters. The second confession is that I don't actually work on real evaluation in that sense. My organization with the Social Progress Index is using existing data to try and make visible issues that are about real quality of life, whether it's whether people are hungry, whether people get to be educated, whether people experience rights. We're trying to do that with the existing data. And we think we can have an impact on that because we can provide data that helps government officials, businesses, investors to make better decisions that are more focused on the real needs of people. But I yearn that we could be using data or partnering with other data that's able to more powerfully reflect the real perspective of individuals and communities around their needs, their quality of life, and their priorities. So I'm a huge supporter and want to work with this initiative because I think there's a real potential here.
Thanks so much, Michael. I want to turn then to the question that actually, Kathi, you raised, which is, why isn't this already the norm? All right? Why is this so, relatively speaking, uncommon? And as I said, I put these two propositions up to say that one, it's a design issue because we think so often of clients, beneficiaries, communities as if they're consumers, but they're not simply consumers. Right? The second is power. By giving them this, that actually is letting go of a lot of power. And that might mean uncovering stuff that's unpleasant. That means, for example, that all of a sudden there's a different priority than the one we raised money for, than we budgeted for. Garbage is all of a sudden the issue, right? But yeah, is that correct? Or is there something else going on here? Kathi, why don't you kick off?
So I think the power is definitely a part of it, like in different senses of the word. It's like having the power to define what you need and what you want. I mean, those are important first steps, and then having actually the power to do something about it is obviously a whole different thing. But I like whatever is additionally, I think we cannot forget that first part. I think it's more than that, though. So, I mean, generally, everything that's kind of new and not where there's not like very clearly specified things of how to do it can also be scary for in other senses, right? Like if you're an organization trying to figure out how to like run a program. There's so many things to consider and so many things to, so many unknowns. And if you have frameworks that tell you how to evaluate, you're gonna take those because they help you to just, you know, move along. So maybe one of the important things of why it is not more common is that there's just kind of a path dependency issue, right? Like if there's not more to just, if there's no materials you can easily follow, then it's going to be harder to use it. So like, but again, I think the fear of giving up the power with all that entails is probably a big part of it too. Michael,
yeah, why isn't real evaluation, again, whatever we call it, why isn't this already a new norm? Why hasn't it been around for years?
Well, I think we should apply our own principles and think about some audience insight from the people we're trying to influence, those who control large pools of capital, whether in government or business. And I think we're probably selling it the wrong way. If we're telling people in power, we're here to ask you to give up power, that's not very attractive. But if we're telling them we're here to save you money, we're here to make your money work better, I think we may find that we get a much better reception. So I think there's a bit of it is how we sell it. I think the other one is a recognition that so much of this is often done so far on a project by project basis, and that just isn't sustainable. It's expensive, it's patchy, it only becomes about one project, it's not about systems. And I think, again, part of this is real evaluation is a systemic issue and it requires a systemic solution. And we've got to be thinking about this kind of data, this kind of information being a utility, a public good that's got to be invested in, created, if we're going to shift the whole conversation. Because if real evaluation only happens at the end or in the middle of a project once the money is being committed, you're never going to change it. But if you can have decisions working on the back of real data before the money is committed, then you're much more able to change it. So I do think part of the agenda for Catalyst 2030 has got to be around driving this conversation about saying, don't treat this as a little project intervention tool, a new tool to manage your project. This actually, around the SDGs, is a critical systems utility building effort we have to do if we're going to have any chance of achieving the SDGs. Because if we're doing it without real data, without real evaluation, we will fail.
Thank you very much, Michael. Tab, why do you think this isn't more common?
Well, a couple of things. I think it may be more common than we think if we look at it from the viewpoint of how many organizations are doing it rather than how much money is spent on projects that are balanced on this. I think that, as Michael referred to, I think there is a scalability issue currently. And if you're looking at, as he says, you know, the lived experiences of people being the greatest insight into the kinds of projects that will have real benefits to those experiences, then it's the organizations that are closest to those problems and to those communities that are going to know the most about them, mainly through direct communication, especially because the people that need the most help have the least technology and are the least accessible through kind of forms of technology. And so that if I keep going back to this idea of scalability, and I think back to a book by William Easterly called The White Man's Burden, where he tears down the whole idea of international aid and kind of shows all the problems that he sees with it, and then has no recommendations for how to do it right, except for his observations that the only projects that he sees that are really successful are the ones that are small, grassroots driven, bottom up, and really don't have any direct correlation to the overarching goals of like the Millennium Goals or getting rid of poverty or anything. They're only based on the exact communities in which they were formed. So they were very customized to the people that needed them. And so that I think there's a scalability problem. And so I would throw out the question of that, is it harder for large organizations and governments to formulate projects based on let's say, real evaluation, client-driven evaluation than it is for small organizations who are really close to the ground to do the same thing. And I would argue, I would like to learn more about this. It's really, it's a hypothesis of mine that the small organizations have a much better connection to the communities they serve, and so are more in tune with this kind of project basing on the exact needs, the custom needs of each community. And they build their programs based on that. And I know we're an example of that. And so it may be more common than it seems, but small orgs like us have much less visibility because we have much less money than large organizations that potentially, you could say, are getting it wrong or whatever, but are just not as in touch with the communities and the projects that they're serving. And so I would investigate this scalability. And I think it ties into the greater question of how do you get international, the UN or these large global organizations to tie into a concept like this. You have to get past the obstacles to this scalability issue. And and Michael was also talking about data. How do you get better data from these communities, the platform? Like, how do you do that? And tackling those issues would make this easier for larger orgs to tie into this. And when we as the smaller, we also want to grow. And how much can we actually scale up our operations before we hit those same logistical obstacles and we start to get out of touch? And so I would say that, our goal as a small org is to scale to the point that we can do everything we're currently doing, but just do more of it. And potentially the way that this discussion could help us is to move things in the direction of formalizing a way for us to scale further using some kind of platform or greater technology or whatever, so that we could do more work with the same level of quality that we have now because we are small. And it may be because we are small that we can do things the way we are. It'd be nice if we could do these same things and be larger. So that's.
Thank you so much, Tom. So can we now, what I suggest we do now, and this is a nice structure provided by the organizers of this catalyzing change meetings, is that we break up into groups now, and that we do take it in two steps. One is to look at what we consider the minimum qualities of this concept. And I suggest we not spend too much time on the terminology, because it's very easy to spend a lot of time on that. But what do we see as the minimal qualities of this? And that ties into then the question of what are the policy recommendations that emanate from it. Now, there's a third set of questions, which is around what it is that we might be able to provide that would help that. So one is what we're asking of others, and then there's asking of ourselves what we could help to provide. And we will come back to that third set of questions around what we can provide as well. So I will now, I've put up these questions here in the chat, and with the help of Julius is, so we have someone whose internet isn't good, that's dropping off, but Julius is going to help to sort us into small groups. And then we will have, I believe, 15 minutes if we have for those group discussions. Julius, is that all right?
Yeah, perfect. I'll enter everybody to the group, and I'll also post a link for the Google Doc, correct, Ferric, if you want
to
explain it? Hello, Christina. Are you having trouble entering a room or?
Thank you so much, everyone. Yeah, people are coming in. Thank you so much for taking part. Do we have rapporteurs from our breakout groups? I know we have a rapporteur from ours. So can I invite Selina to share from the group I was in?
Yes, thank you, Frederick. In our group, we talked about minimum qualities of, a certain consensus or minimum number of positive community results when you look at the impact of a project or an intervention, and also a minimum level of consent before beginning a project, that projects are initiated from below or the loop is closed, and stakeholder. And we also had a conversation around how stakeholders have different agendas, and you have to look at, everyone needs a voice in whether projects proceed and how they proceed, and taking care to make sure that all stakeholders are heard equally, which is, it dives directly into the what would we recommend to the UN, and that is, the voices of community members tend to be forgotten along the way. So client-driven evaluation is a way to consistently hear their voices and bring them to the table in a way that they would not normally have. Did I miss anything, you guys? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Michael has indicated to me that he is happy to report back from his group.
So we failed to appoint a rapporteur. We're just two interesting people, so we didn't get to those such prosaic details. So I'll try and do what I can. I mean, the richest we had North America, Africa, and Asia in one conversation sharing, which is one of the joys of Catalyst 2030. I mean, I think, if I could sort of just do a rich conversation, but it seems to me like one of these big examples that we were given, Chris from West Africa was saying, was how donors will say we want 3,000 people trained, because that's 3,000 lives touched. We don't want 30 lives transformed. And so much of the data we get is around this two-dimensional top-down view, whereas the total area of people touched is what matters, even if it's just that thick. Whereas if you have real evaluation, maybe we should call it three-dimensional evaluation, you actually get that much richer sense of depth. And I think what that will also reveal to us, the fact that there are roots, and roots are interconnected. And again, this ridiculous siloing of funds, so that everyone applying for grant funds is basically having to twist what they do to fit through these windows that donors create and allow us to think in that more holistic sense. And that all can be opened up if we've got this kind of access to data.
Michael, thank you. All right. And Zach, I understand that you will be reporting back.
Yeah, happy to. So we did talk briefly about the terminology, and then I would say we focused a bit more on question 2, how to kind of get traction with this. And I think actually the terminology does connect to that. So I'll just share brief thoughts on that. First, basically that the term evaluation has a bit of baggage and connotation that comes with it. It implies to many kind of a level of kind of scientific or rigorous methodology, which may not be the kind of connotation that we necessarily want to be after here. It also can imply either use of a counterfactual that you're comparing against, or doing it at the end of the project, which is definitely not what we're trying to get after if we think back to some of the examples. So we like the idea of incorporating the word design in whatever it is that is kind of coming out of this. In terms of how we so design feedback, but maybe reconsidering use of the term evaluation. We did talk about how needs assessment are is sort of the upfront closest thing to what we've been talking about, but they're obviously done in many different ways. In terms of how do we get traction, with the UN and the social sector at large, a couple different ideas came out. So one was starting with funders. So basically, implementers, organizations are going to generally, Michael touched on this briefly, but like people are going to follow, funding and where the opportunities are. And if funders could introduce new steps into their due diligence or change how they ask, application questions, that might help drive funds to organizations that are doing this kind of community-driven design or community kind of collaborative design and projects that have this kind of feedback loop incorporated in them. And then we talked a little bit, the question was raised, is this easier for small organizations than for larger organizations? I think that's an important thing to think about. Every organization carries with it sort of, its history of work that it's done in that community. And in some respects, creating this new kind of open, feedback-oriented way of communicating is perhaps easier done if you don't have a long history of work, of delivering programs in the community. Maybe that's different. It depends on the organization, obviously. But that's a kind of an important question to think about. And obviously, small organizations are just under a lot of pressure from larger organizations. So how do we make sure that the time and space is available for this? We did talk a little bit about technology, but I think that's just a bigger topic and one that needs a little bit more airtime.
Zach, thank you so much. It's great to hear what's come back here, and it is a multiplicity of voices, but there are, our group has become a little smaller, which is great for us in the sense that we haven't heard from everyone. And is there anyone else who would like to add their voice to this? Any further thoughts that any of you have that you would like to share?
Hello, this is Amit Motwani from Austin, Texas here. I'd really like to echo what Zach has shared around the incorporation of the word design into the terminology. And as much as I appreciate certainly the notion of client-centered evaluation, I think that, without the client-driven design or the client community-guided design, that evaluation is just really one half of a whole, and I think that design, sort of speaking, also just the terminology helps to move perhaps the funders, the larger institutions, the governments, the folks who you tend to often see themselves as they are, as experts, who are using this terminology. I think it helps to sort of socially norm them a little bit into appreciating these approaches, because human-centered design and these sort of buzzwords or buzz phrases, I think, are really big because they're successful, or they're demonstrative of approaches that are generally successful. And I think the more funders hear these things, the more they get moved. And I think that's also demonstrated by a lot of large foundations. Even here in the United States, the Ford Foundation recently had come out and said that they're moving entirely away from restricted funds, and that the dollars that they would be funding organizations with would be unrestricted, because they wanted organizations to meet community needs as appropriately as they felt through their assessment process. And I think also the not just the advent, but the takeoff of direct cash assistance programs sort of represents a similar ethic and thought. And I think the best way to sort of, or one of many good approaches to move funders in this direction is to sort of socially norm around best practices, doing exactly what's being done, frankly, here in this discussion and in the TED Talks that cascade out from it. So thank you for the opportunity to participate.
I'm muted. Amit, thank you so much for this. And as you contribute, but I'll just come back to you, Amit. What would be a recommendation, a concrete recommendation that you would make that we could have as to hang around that?
Well, I think in as much as what our capacity is a concrete recommendation for, I guess, answer 3, which was, or rather question 3, for moving funders and governments and larger institutions and more into the mindset of client-centered evaluation, I think is to, again, along the lines of socially norming them. If a document might be produced from something like this, that's just bullets the best practices of leading funders, and they only work in projects that have been designed and have documented design and guidance from the communities. They only work in projects that, as Michael, I think, so astutely mentioned earlier, that include a closed loop process with clients as part of the evaluation, et cetera, sort of identify. They only work, leading funders, would work in programs with unrestricted funds. without funds that don't have strings attached to them. So you're not sort of squeezing yourself through the windows inefficiently, again, as Michael was alluding to earlier. Sort of a checklist of best practices for funders, the same way implementers in the service sector or social enterprises need to adhere to best practices in our implementation. And I think, getting momentum around documents or just literature like that is extremely important. We all work in something in many ways, both fortunately and unfortunately, in something of an echo chamber. And so sooner or later, the discussion, the ethic of the discussion begins to consume us all.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Anyone else on any concrete recommendations? Now we're really trying to advance this agenda. What is the novelty of what we're able to propose here that might catch someone's attention, but also truly advance this set of issues that we're talking about?
Just I put in the chat, but just to build on Amit's input there, I think an analogy to look at here would be the principles for digital development. Basically, a group came together, they were able to kind of say, these are the 9 principles. They've workshopped that. It's a living, it's a living set of principles. So it has community feedback kind of baked into it. But they've got, they've kind of put out these principles, and organizations are able to sign on to the principles and kind of endorse them. And I think that kind of approach might be a way of mobilizing key players, whether that's funders, whether that's, connectors, advisors, experts, in the sector, or practitioners for that matter, to kind of sign on to the principles of community-driven design or whatever kind
That's
of
a great example. And in fact, in a call with a big donor just a few days ago, they were repeating those principles back and saying that that's how they operate. So thanks. Anyone else?
Yes, I would like to add something, Frederick. In our section, we came to 3 main conclusions. One of them, that the client-driven evaluation is not negotiable. We cannot negotiate with that client-driven evaluation. That's a core, is the essence of our work. Another thing that the clients we serve, they are able to co-create criteria that in the end of the day, we, the clients and the technical support, they will measure the improvement, the improvement of their lives. And another conclusion that we arrive is we have to have a very strong IT area, to collect data, to real measure their improvement. But the new things, I think, new, not for us, because we have 3 decades working with very poor people fighting poverty, but we understood that the clients, they can co-create the criteria that we will measure with them their development.
Vera, thank you so much. If I may, is on the design principle, this is what makes it practical, right? Because it's so easy to talk about co-creation of design, but what you have said makes it very practical and actionable. Thank you so much, Vera. Yeah, it only took 30 years to do this, so thank you. Anyone else? Yes, Michael.
Just one thought is about how we actually frame the SDGs themselves. Because I think within the UN bureaucracy, the SDGs will be achieved if 8.3.4 clause A is done, tick. 9.3.2 clause C, tick, is done. And that is completely the wrong way to think about these. If this is some top-down plan that's about ticking a bunch of boxes, that's going to go wrong. And so I think a message we've got to put through Catalyst 2030 has got to be the SDGs are achieved through the lived experience of the people of the world. And unless you can capture and report back on that basis, you cannot say you have achieved the SDGs. That's the only meaningful measure.
That's very powerful. Thank you very much. Yeah. I'm being reminded privately by our amazing helper, Julius in the background, that we need to create a 2-pager coming out of this. And yeah, Julius, rest assured, we are working towards this. And of course, I'm hoping that that some of you will be willing to be part of that process. What I'm suggesting is that as we're sharing here concrete recommendations, I will work with a small group and we'll draft something and then share it as a Google Doc to everyone here. And Julius, I assume we have everyone's email here that's in this group. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah,
So
thank
then
you.
we can easily follow up with you. No. On this wave of amazing suggestions already being made, can I have more, please?
May I make a thought, Frederick?
Yes, please. And then Zach, Tab, please go ahead.
I didn't know how to do the raise your hand. Anyway, I feel like so much of the direction for this sort of thing is to develop a way to communicate a platform or an idea and translate it upward to the UN, to the powers that be, to the funders, to the donors. And once again, it's sort of shifting the weight in the other direction away from where it should be. And I just think that if you look at one of the things that should happen is that if we can shine a light on all the small orgs out there that are doing the work that's closest to the ground, that's most in tune with the communities that they're working with, and that if funds can go in that direction, so often the funding in the space gets sucked up by the organizations that are the biggest, that have the biggest teams, the most ability to reach out to and take large grants. And the large donors like giving out large grants because they can do it with a smaller staff and it's easier to manage. And so in every aspect of this process, in my opinion, the people that are doing the best work always get left out, and that leaves out the people that they're getting worked with. And so if there's a way in the course of this to shift the focus downward, both in terms of who is giving the evaluations, the design information to the projects, which would be the clients, and the smaller orgs that are closest to the ground to be more of part of the discussion and have more access to the funding at the larger levels, somehow, like something like that.
That's an important thing, and I really, again, thank you for emphasizing that again. I'm certainly a very strong believer in the power of the small, and that could be a neighborhood initiative, etc. It has many forms, right? And yours is one beautiful expression of that. So can I suggest for the next 10 minutes, if we shift the focus a bit on something that Michael framed, is what is it that we need to offer as Catalyst 2030, as social entrepreneurs? How are we actually going to contribute to making this possible? We have a set of requests, demands, yeah, and even, as Vera said, non-negotiables. But what are we offering? Michael, yeah, Kathi, please.
No, I mean, it's something that has been mentioned before already, but I think like a catalog of examples, best practice examples and tools, like the more concrete, the better, to get people started, whether or not they then use those specific tools.
Thank you. And Michael, you've talked about it being a utility. What do you mean by that?
I think it's a word that you've got to build this as an entire system, and that requires a deep investment in creating all the pipes and wires to get this everywhere, rather than being a patchwork of kind of project initiatives. So, I mean, I think for Catalyst 2030, to answer your question, is I think what we should be saying is that, we should be saying the SDGs are only achieved in terms of the real life of people, and that we're going to hold them to account, and we're going to build a system that's going to, this community is going to build a system that's going to hold the world to account on really achieving the SDGs. And we should put that on the table and invite people to support us in building that utility.
And by the way, it's the only way elections are won as well, right? You can't win them based on a tick box of which SDGs you have made progress on. Yes, Selina.
I feel like the other opportunity that this initiative, Catalyst 2030, presents is a collaboration between all of the different people who all have their little corner of way of helping, whether that is through wash interventions, through electricity, solar panels, healthcare. Like, we all have something that we do well, and this collaborative gives us a view into all of the pockets of people doing good things in good ways, perhaps with this base level of how we operate that we are committed to and that we sign on to. And that collaboration is where the power is, because you have to continue, like, you can't do one thing without doing something else. And so you have this view into all the different organizations that are doing their small part. And how do we layer those together in a way that is like, I just imagine this bigger project platform where, you have to do water first, but then you can do electricity, and then you can do healthcare to get the children healthy once they have clean water and rid of the parasites. So it's a way of layering on improvements at a small scale. And I'm getting lost in my train of thought, but this collaborative is powerful because it's bringing so many people together who are trying to work together.
Well, thank you, Selina. That's certainly the spirit. Yeah, I mean, Christopher, did I see you raising your hand?
No, but actually, I'm happy to say something just there as well.
Yes, please.
I actually think in the same vein that we were saying that to go back to the other side of what were we demanding on donors and funders and whatnot. Actually, we should start thinking of it from our side as well, in the sense that if we are demanding that donors listen to us, or to say that, okay, we don't want this top-down approach and whatnot, we also need to ensure that through the organizations that we're running in our companies and whatnot, to take that own advice for ourselves as well, right? So we need to make sure that we're not demanding donors to ask for, change the way that they prioritize and they focus on particular SDGs and whatnot, until we are also willing to accept that it might mean that we've got to change how we actually implement and run programs, or how we dive into communities and whatnot. As an entrepreneur, it's very easy to get caught up in your own mindset to say, I want to do this, and then we say that the donor should help me do this, but we've also never considered what it is that the clients in that community or the people of that community actually want as well. So I think that's something that we also need to consider, and sort of to go back into the vein of the collaboration as a group, is to say, look, we want this from you, but actually we're also willing to do this. And I think that's the right voice that we can push forward with.
Thank you. Amit?
Yes, well, of course, I agree with what everyone has said. I really love the notion that Selina mentioned about leveraging the collaborative sort of momentum that Catalyst 2030 could be able to maximize. I think I'm not so familiar with Catalyst 2030, and glad I am now, in as much as its capacity to sort of perhaps execute on these suggestions. However, it doesn't seem like a stretch that, coming out from this two-pager that you've been discussing, within that two-pager perhaps is one page of sort of a checklist of best practices, e.g. Communities are involved in the design from the beginning, and certainly in the selection of how the program would be evaluated. And then of course, in the evaluation at an immediate point after project completion and certain times thereafter, as well as non-restricted funds, et cetera, sort of these best practices. But then from there, perhaps a design, maybe just a little bit of a design handbook that goes even more profoundly into each steps of how program development could be, the publication or creation of something like that. And then finally, taking that to a final stage, I might visualize a workshop that could happen online that would be really similar to sort of a design principles workshop or a human-centered design workshop that we might do for any sort of initiative in the commercial sector, where you're mapping out personas. But in addition to mapping out personas, you actually have communities and client members at the table working with you to map out those personas and sort of drive the elements of project design. So a workshop that really takes it comprehensively. And I think that might, in addition to being a valuable or perhaps a revenue producer that could sustain itself, it could catch fire and really yield a lot of change, especially if exemplary programs were brought in to sort of participate and guide design sessions like that. So again, forgive me as I don't know exactly what the capacity might be, but I'm feeling that capacity, given the degree of expertise that you all have brought together here, I don't see it as a stretch. Cheers.
Thank you so much, Amit. Really appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a handful that we haven't heard from. And can I warmly invite you? We'd love to hear your voices and thoughts. I see Andrea, Christina, Mirella. No, they're shy. That's okay.
No, hi, Frederick. This is Mirella. No, I just want to highlight what Vera said. In the discussions we are having, the importance, of having this kind of evaluation and starting from the beginning, the construction of participatory indicators, a participatory methodology to construct the indicators. I think this is the very important, and also to have this very robust IT system, so we can track the evaluation. And also somebody else mentioned before, that's important. What are we going to do with the data? I think this is very important. Like what are the actions that we can do in a participatory way with the data collected?
Thank you, Mirella. And Renata, I had seen you as well. Yeah. Any last inputs? Yes, Renata.
I was in a group with Vera and Mirella, and we really just got down to the essence of what this has been, which is, for the organization, which truly sounds amazing, and everyone here is doing amazing work. It's just at the end of it is listening to the community members, and just as Amit was saying, writing best practices and seeing how, we can build on just from learning the communities, and also the importance of data and what we're going to do with it, evaluating the projects every few years, or, however we're going to design that, and then just actually learning from it. I'm part of the Project Schoolhouse team, so I'm here with Tab and Selina, and thank you for inviting me. But, we just, at the end of it and at the core of it, we just listen to what the people need, and they are ready to do the work, and they're so ready to have clean water and keep working. So we just want to keep working and building on that, and it has worked for us so far, and we just want to keep growing and listening to people.
Thank you, Renata. And coming back to you, Tab, right, how would you, you've put it very beautifully in terms of the small organizations and how difficult it is for you to get visibility, but we know so many are doing great work. Not everyone is, but you wouldn't be able to stay around in a community for that long if you weren't doing something decent, right? And so what would success look like from your point of view? How would you know that we had in some form succeeded with this? What would it mean for you?
I keep going back to the idea of scale and being able to get more work done without losing anything that we've already built. The economists use the word negative externalities to describe things that happen when you push past, its expediency. And if you get into negative externalities, you start talking about net benefit rather than total benefit. And I always say that we try to keep our total benefit equal to the net benefit. So all good. We don't want any negative things happening, which happen when you push past the scale. When you go too fast, we try to go really slowly. We believe we try to do development like Miles Davis plays jazz. We think less is more sometimes. And so for me, we as an org want to grow, and we want to get to the maximum place that we can in terms of funding and impact while not losing the essence of how we do work and what are our big qualities. And for me, if something were to come out of this that would give us tools and structure and the ability to scale further than that with the same, while also not losing anything, let us go bigger, let us go further through funding, through technology, through our programs, but still stay true to the focus that we have, and it still always relates down to size in terms of, I think some of the things that we're able to do are because we're little. And it would be great to turn the corner on that so that we can do those things that we can do because we're small, but grow and grow bigger than we would be able to otherwise without this collaborative and these tools and perhaps some kind of platform so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel when we want to do our own impact evaluations. And I think there's a lot of reinventing the wheel, especially for small orgs.
Exactly.
And if you can remove those needs and give them tools so that they don't have to spend resources on doing things that the next org over is also doing, then you save everybody money and you gain some efficiencies in the industry, and that would be great.
Yeah. And that comes to Michael's point, I believe. Yeah. So thank you so much. Just rounding up in the last little bit that we have together. I haven't quite followed the instructions that Julius gave me in terms of sending out a poll with the date and time for the next meeting. But we'll put that in the document and the Google Doc that will be shared with everyone. And try to draft something based on these inputs here and a little prior discussion with a couple of you. And then very much hoping that we can reconvene, that many of you will be willing to join us for that next meeting in about a month's time, a little less than a month. Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone, for taking part, and to Kathi, to Michael, for your contributions as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Good day, good morning, good evening. All the very best. Cheers.